there's the perfect introduction to tonight's podcast. So tonight we have a special guest, Natalie O'Regan, who's just graduated from UCC Law.
Yeah, that's it. Just finished my master's in law.
Master's in law. And we've got AJ and Dinty on this evening as well. And AJ, you had heard Natalie talking on the Gino Kenny Facebook live stream with Luke Ming-Flanagan and a doctor, and thought,
Dr. Garrett McGovern, Gerard Rowe, Luke Ming-Flanagan, and Orla
Campbell.
That's it.
And that panel was put together by Gino. You recorded it, AJ, and we must put it up on the SoundCloud. And your position was that there should be reform. So you did your law, you did your master's in, your thesis was reform of cannabis laws.
Yeah, it was more focused on the consequences of the stigma of criminalisation of cannabis and how decriminalisation can help combat that. But once you're kind of researching anything got to do with cannabis reform, you go down rabbit holes, and everybody ends up on the same position of it should be kind of more legalised and reformed in a regulated market. And I think once you look into it, that's the only logical conclusion that you can come to.
So you have a supervisor on your master's, right? And you've got peers in UCC. What were the positions of your peers within the law department of UCC about your thesis? Because surely these people are developing the next minds on in law. So what was there like?
See what Chair's done there is he's able to put a question to you that I had rattling around in my brain and couldn't put it into so few words. This is a question that I'm really interested to hear your opinion on. Yeah.
I think I'm probably known as the weed girl at this stage in the law faculty.
Okay.
But like I do remember when I was kind of thinking what to write my dissertation on. You kind of have a few topics in your head and you go to talk to different lecturers to try and figure out, like, is this something I can write about? And
is this something
they'll give you? Yeah, like, is this something that I'll actually have enough to write on?
Okay.
And like different lecturers have their different backgrounds. So you'd have like justice, so you'd have medical, you'd have kind of penology, be about prisons and punishment, and you'd have criminology. So I went to kind of a few and they were saying medical. I was like, no, I don't really want to go down medical. That's a minefield that I don't want to go near. And I went to my supervisor, Dr. Catherine O'Sullivan. I was like, right, I want to write about it on cannabis. And she's like, okay, what part? I was like, I don't know. I know it's not medical, but I don't know what else I want to write about. Like, So I was kind of batting around a couple of ideas, and I came back to her and I was like, right, I think I have an idea. So I went through it and she's like, okay, yeah, that can work. But you're going to need more. And she probably hated working with me in one way, because it was like, what are you actually writing about? And every week would be something different. Like every week up until the last kind of month or two, it was changing. I'm going to focus on this. I'm going to focus on that. It still got to do with cannabis, but it just went down rabbit holes.
Yeah, because there's so many avenues in it. And did they, like, did your supervisor approach it just on the black and white of law, or was there any emotional connection to it? Were they kind of going, well, no, I don't think this should be legalized?
Yeah, were you challenged on it because you were?
Yeah.
No, like, thankfully the law faculty down there aren't like that. Like they might have their own opinions, but it is a good school to go to and to learn, because they all are open to debate regardless of their own personal opinion. Yeah. It's not an argument. It's not shouting and screaming or anything like that.
Yeah.
Or it's not that anybody won't listen to you. It's like, okay, prove your point. You're a law student. If you want to go into law, you're going to have to argue and you're going to have to prove your point. So prove it to me. Convince me.
Yeah, good point.
You know, which is, looking back on it, I hated it, because it's like, oh, you're putting me on the spot. I don't know what to say. And I kind of mumble over words a lot. But looking back on it, it was probably the best teaching, the best way to tackle teaching in law, I think.
And I've written down a few points. One of the things you've said is it's not medical. But this is the thing, the argument that you're making now is that it should be under medical supervision rather than judiciary, as in it shouldn't be a law issue. It should be a medical issue. So it is.
Or is it that
I think in certain cases it should be a medical issue. Like, I don't think just because you use cannabis, you're an addict. Just because you have a beer, you're not an alcoholic.
Okay.
I don't think all cannabis use equals addiction. I think and in the conversation of cannabis, the sensible, responsible user often gets overlooked, and people talk about the bad things. And
what's the parallel to the sensible user in a legalized, a regulated sector? And this is the comparison that always happens is marijuana consumption and alcohol consumption. Sure, we're not all drinking all day. So what's the parallels that make the average user, that you kind of described, the social smoker or whatever?
Like, there's people out there who go home and they have their one joint or their one vape or their one edible at night to go to sleep, or they'd have it first thing in the morning to calm their anxiety. They're normal, everyday people. They're probably your solicitor or your doctor or serving you in a shop or driving your taxi. Like, they're not impaired. They're not walking around stoned out of their head or high out of their head. They're normal people, and you probably know a lot more cannabis users than you actually think.
Yeah, and there are probably even other situations or other people that would be smoking it, not even like in the evenings. Like, I have friends that would smoke it every few months or something like that. It's not so they used to smoke. They used to be everyday smokers, but they got older and, life happens and kids and, but every once in a while they will.
Friday night, I'll sit down.
Yeah. So like there's a massive amount of users out there. It's not just guys that are addicted to it, or like you said, Natalie, we're just hearing the negatives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and listen, the people who were around who were teenagers in the 60s are now in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. That sort of time of peace and love and smoking weed and taking other substances, they're older now. So looking at society as a cross section, the age range of these consumers are they fill up the full spectrum. Going back to why we want to see it legalized, or the thought behind the conversations that we've been having over the past few weeks, is that regulating it serves the younger generation more than anyone else. I think adults and people who are older, they've enough experience in their lives to understand what a substance is, whether it be caffeine, alcohol, nicotine, and how to manage that themselves. And I think addiction is something which it's not synonymous to drugs. It's not even synonymous to intoxicants. It's a habit. It's a habitual thing. And from a legal aspect, like you mentioned, you did the civil law. You've got your civil law degree, and then you did a master's. So, is it a civil right? Should we be allowed? These are the sorts of conversations we have on GTA now. Shouldn't we be allowed to grow a plant in a garden? Isn't that a civil right? Who decides that it's illegal to grow? Put it this way:
are you asking what's the reason for the prohibition? Like, why has it come to pass that it's prohibited? But considering that the what it is,
because
it was legal up until the early 19th century.
All over the shop. Like, some places didn't legalize it until 1977 or something.
But
it was something stupid like
that.
Like the war, like the whole thing against marijuana can be traced back to one guy in the States, Arslinger. I can never say his name.
We call him Arslinger.
I can never get his name out I think it's just that I'm allergic to it or something. Would you blame me?
Is this the cotton farmer? Is this the cotton farmer that didn't want to lose out, or the wood industry guy? What was?
No, he was a guy that I think he was in competition with the guy that eventually set up the FBI, Hoover.
Oh yeah.
And he didn't get the job, so he was a bit peed, but he didn't like the minorities and the jazz musicians and the Mexicans coming in, and he didn't get the job for the FBI. So he's like, right, how can I make a name for myself? So he decided to tackle cannabis, and that's where the name marijuana came from. So he basically invented the word marijuana because it sounded more Mexican, and it would be associated with Mexicans more because it's a foreign sounding word.
Yes.
And he used basically the war on marijuana to target people of color in America and immigrants, and basically turned what was a plant, which was widely related or widely used all in through medicine, had hundreds of usage, and he turned this plant into a stigmatizing thing that people didn't want to associate with these people because they smoke marijuana, and marijuana makes criminals.
Isn't he quoted to have said that one of the reasons why he didn't want marijuana to be freely available was because it gave, I forget the exact wording, but it gave something, he said something like he didn't want black people to think that they were as important as white people. I think that I've seen somewhere a quote from this guy, or from around that time, that was one of the sort of driving reasons behind. So there's this huge racist element.
Yeah. And I think there was more about like when women smoked it, they wanted to sleep with
that's right. They were getting lazy
and black people, they didn't want the white women to smoke the marijuana.
Yeah, I think you said
like that.
Did you mention jazz as well? Like the jazz players smoked weed and
the jazz cigarette.
But jazz was made illegal in Ireland. I have an excellent vinyl.
Really?
Yeah, I have a vinyl RTE archive vinyl, and I have actually written a piece of music that I scratch this RTE broadcast about Eamon de Valera and how jazz music was banned on account that it was irreligious in Ireland. So yeah, it's an interesting. So I asked, is it a civil right? Do we not have a civil right to be able to grow? Now I know that's a loaded question, obviously, and I suppose someone could turn around and say, "Well, you're going to grow poppies and cocoa plants and or whatever," But I
think everyone should have the right to grow a plant. I think the issue comes with what it's used for. Like as long as you don't convert it to heroin.
But it's no problem to brew beer in your bath,
Yeah. And like I do think in the whole legalized cannabis argument, like it is important to think people want to grow a plant. They don't want to go to the chemist to buy it from a pharmacy or buy it from a pharmaceutical company. We like cannabis users want homegrown products. They want local products. They want Irish grown products.
Well, here's that kind of brings me in, because the reform is something I think that we would probably all agree on. But what are the benefits to reform? So when you were looking into it, what are the pros of allowing it to happen, to being able to say you can go and grow as many as you want? Like, we're not all planting paracetamol trees in our garden. Yeah. So I'm sure if you could, it might be a problem. But let's say, what are the benefits of the reform then? What does it do for everyone?
The benefits go kind of far and wide, but even if you're talking about just the cannabis user themselves, just the person, the individual, you're not labeling them as a criminal. You're not ruining their whole lives with a criminal conviction. They don't have travel bans or visa bans. Like, they don't have to worry about Garda vetting getting flagged up when they're looking for a job.
Yeah.
And like, even in my own research for the dissertation, like I was focusing on the consequences of stigma, and that stigma comes from the criminal label that's attached from criminalizing cannabis users.
Okay.
And the consequences of this are huge. Like, people don't realize when you're talking about the harms of cannabis use, the most harm that comes from cannabis use, it comes from the criminalization of it.
Yeah. So the risk,
people are getting. Go on, sorry.
But the risk is not using it, is not having it. It's being caught.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, which
like people
drives
are getting
paranoia.
extradited and thrown out from their communities and their families because they're now a criminal, or now they're a druggie or a stoner, or like even the way it's portrayed in the media, it's always a bad light.
And I saw you quote about the Cheech and Chong film. You were talking about how the Cheech and Chong. Now, for me, I
love those movies. Don't get me wrong.
I there's a great story by Tommy Chong. He's on a round table with a load of other comedians, and he gets raided by the Drug Enforcement Agency, and they're like, they came to my company, it's Chong's Bongs, and the whole crowd just
I
cracks
think
up,
I was talking about this with someone today.
Yeah. This is the thing.
I think I know what you're going to say.
Yeah. But, and they do a drug raid on his house, and they say to him, have you any drugs? And and they forgot to bring the dogs. And they say, have you got any drugs? And he's like, yeah. And they're like, in what room? And he's like, in every room. In every room, And he could tell that, like, he went to prison. He started his own podcast in prison while serving time for sending paraphernalia across state lines. And that's what happened.
Yeah, he got caught for bongs of all things. Like, that's what he got punished for. Was, I think, not paying tax on cross-state orders or something like that.
He wasn't allowed to ship it out of state. And he said that basically somebody in the inside, they got a plant on the inside and sent it across state lines to a state where it was illegal, because like it's sweeping, say, from California and from New York in America, it hadn't quite hit these states yet. So, but I think there's a softening that socially probably more acceptable now than it was, and the law hasn't caught up with that.
No, like the law is so far behind to actual public opinion on cannabis. All you have to do is look on any post on social media or Facebook or Twitter that the guards put up on cannabis seizures. Every single comment is like, stop wasting your time.
Is it confirmation bias though? Is it confirmation bias for us who want to...
Like, I think Twitter and Facebook and all that is probably an echo chamber as well. Like, you're only going to get one side of the argument.
Yeah.
There's always going to be people against it. You're never going to have full public buy-in on the legalization of cannabis, because at the end of the day, people have seen their loved ones, their friends or their family harmed by cannabis. There are people that have addiction issues, or that, go beyond a point of no return, and you have to hit rock bottom before you come back.
Yeah, seatbelts. There was a big protest against when seatbelts were made legal, legally enforceable in the UK. That was a big thing. There weren't seatbelts in cars. They realized that it's probably safer to have seatbelts in cars. And despite the pushback, they still went through and implemented the seatbelts. Wearing a seatbelt can damage you. There's just a fact. If you have a crash, cannabis can. I've always viewed cannabis as more of a catalyst rather than a driver of mental health issues. I see it as a catalyst, in that, if you are having a shit time, or if you are, struggling with certain things, it can actually help you focus on those things. And the negative of that can be, paranoia, worrying, that kind of thing. But at least you're actually giving it attention. Whereas something like alcohol or pornography or, gambling addictions, they tend to numb you. You become less self-aware. So you're actually, and that plays into the point about the fact that it's criminalizing. It's very criminalizing.
It's very criminalizing. You'll get criminalized with it.
You can actually criminalize if you.
Is it incriminating? It might be incriminating.
The fact that it's driving fear in the younger people, it's pushing them away from the areas that we want them in, the youth clubs, the health clubs, the sports clubs, and that kind of thing.
Are you saying if little Jimmy could light up in the pool hall, he'd be there rather than out on the streets?
Little Tommy Tucker can rip a bong before he goes to the playground. That's not what I'm saying. I'm an advocate for an older age. Sorry to cut you off, Natalie, but I'm an advocate for like a 21-year-old or even 25-year-old age limit on cannabis, because I think that's one thing the states have got right, is having a 21 and the age of 21 as the drinking age. I think that's
no.
Yeah, again.
I done all my worst by the time I was 21. 21 was my sensible years.
Yeah.
No.
So what age would you, if we could legalize it across the board recreationally tomorrow, what age? How do you think? How would you envisage the? And I know it's a very open question, but simple. Would we treat it the same as alcohol?
Yeah, I think 18 would be a good age, because the way it is now, drug dealers don't ask for ID. They're not going to ask, how old are you? They don't care. They're going to give it to you. There's school kids out there who find it easier to get cannabis than they can get their pouch of Amber Leaf or their 20 John Player Blue in the shop.
And they might,
just
be
the way it
upsold
is.
other stuff as well. I think that's...
And upsold other stuff when they don't have cannabis. But I think I seen somebody, I can't remember who mentioned it, but somebody put it up on Twitter, and it was actually a very good point, that yes, make it 18 as an age limit, but have THC level restrictions until they're 21.
Yeah.
So yes, you can go into a cannabis shop, and at the end of the day, the people selling the product have to be educated on it and know all the ins and outs of the product, but have a THC limit. So you're not having 18-year-olds going in, because we all know what 18-year-olds are like. We were all probably like that ourselves at that age.
Yeah.
You're going to walk in and go, give me the strongest stuff you have.
Yeah, it's going for the bottle of vodka before you go for the pint.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're drinking a nagging of vodka before you even have a glass of wine with dinner. You know, it's
putting on the
low THC content.
It's putting on the end plates after you've passed your driver's test, or you're not allowed to buy a bottle of scotch until...
Yeah, there were certain
20.
off licenses that would, they'd sell you beers, but they wouldn't sell you a certain amount. You know, they know you're just hitting the age, or you're just the age limit, and they're getting in beers for all their mates. And the guy obviously, nah, you're not taking all that. But what they do with the likes of vodka, it will be 21 age limit in certain places. Now, that's not, obviously wasn't a legal thing. It was just, you know, policy, yes, shop policy.
State by state.
So that's for me, like, the reason...
If I find who gave me that idea, I really have to give them a credit, because I can't remember where I seen it on Twitter, but I seen it. I was like, that's brilliant.
Oh, but look, for me, like,
thank you.
The reason why I'd say 21 myself, because just in relation to what I've heard about the kind of the human brain still developing until 21, and obviously the negative effects that cannabis does have on that growing brain. So that's why I'd say 21 myself. But, you know, like you said, is if there's something like that in place, there you go. You know, that's the workaround for it. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Like, you're never ever going to keep it out of hands of underage children. You're not going to keep alcohol or cigarettes out of their hands. They'll always find a way. They're going to stand outside the off license and ask people, will you go in and get me lots of fags, or go in and get me 6 bottles?
Like that, you know, the chances of then going to a dealer are going to be a lot less, because there's going to be less dealers. You know, it's not going to be as easy to get black market.
But that's the secret. You're going to have to make the regulated market economically viable for the user, so the black market doesn't undercut them. Mm. Because if you can go to your dealer down the road for 20 quid, but it's going to cost you 50 quid in the shop.
To a lot of American friends I have, that's what they're saying is, we still buy it from dealers because it's cheaper. Simple as that. And that's because of the government are going sticking out a massive, you know, tax on it, which is meant to be huge. So yeah, if it's done properly, that would work.
But normally in those situations, rather than have that kind of system, what they would tend to do is they would decide that if you're caught buying it outside of official channels, the penalization is far more than it would have been, even say in current times. That's another route that they could take. So they could decide, and then that brings us back to the problem of the stigma, and like, you know, you're not going to go to jail for having a couple of beers at 16, but you know, if the government chooses to control it by making the illegal trade so heinous that it's you know, and that causes more problems in terms of stigma, then now you've got 16-year-olds that should have been able to get a couple of joints or whatever and go to prison for it. So that's the other way that they could go with it. If you start having...
You're always going to have a black market. Like, you have a black market in cigarettes now. You have a black market in alcohol. It's there.
Shoes, handbags.
Nobody wants to smoke black market cigarettes because they're absolutely disgusting. But they've taxed cigarettes so heavily, it's now costing you, 12 quid or something like that, 13 quid?
Yeah, for
a box of fags. Like, when you can buy in black market for €4 and you don't care what you're putting in your body.
So where's the lack of appetite for reform coming from? Like, where like, is it because you were talking on another podcast about, if you ask Helen McEntee, she says ask Simon Donnelly, ask Martin. I
got another response today. Go back to him go back to her go back to him. I'm just baiting my head off a brick wall at this stage.
if that's the case where you can't get a high level answer, how do they continue to be able to prosecute at the lower levels? You know what I mean? So like, if there's no guidance from above, is it that nobody wants to pull the trigger and say we're the government that allowed it to happen for those maybe traditional, centralist kind of party voters, the ones, let's face it, because it's the over 50s that keep governments in power in most cases.
Yeah,
there's no appetite.
But I think with every government, regardless of who you have in there, in politics, you always have the fear of re-election.
Yeah,
so they're going to. Like, there's always talk about the grey vote, like when they tried to take away the medical card, there was riots.
Yeah.
Like, there's certain cohorts of people that go out in numbers and they vote every single election, every single European election, every single referendum.
Yeah.
And those are the voters that political parties want to hold on to. And I think with cannabis, they're afraid of losing that vote, and they're afraid of losing a certain cohort of vote that they are always guaranteed.
But on the flip side, then what about the younger, 18 plus that are pro legalization,
who are too big to turn up to
more
vote?
Liberal parties. So do they replace one with the other?
Yeah. No, that's before legalization. They won't be baked yet.
Yeah. Yeah, they're rolling their ballot,
ready to go. But I think the student vote, like we've seen it with the repeal the 8th and with equal marriage.
Yeah.
The student voice on that vote made a huge difference. Like, it's probably the vote that got it over the line.
Yeah.
There was people traveling home to vote for those.
Yes.
And I think cannabis is a topic that the younger generation, the student generation, are very aware of, because they don't have the history of reefer madness that the older generation have. They haven't been brought up to drilled into your head that cannabis is this evil devil substance.
Yeah, and there's, when you see the popularity of an actor like Seth Rogen, that would be an older actor to kind of 18 to 20 year olds, and he's portrayed as the stoner that goes, and it not in a reefer madness.
Yeah, and I think like the student vote is what is going to be very, very important if this comes to a vote. And I think it's people are starting to raise their voices. Like, the cannabis activism in Ireland has exploded in 12 months. People are getting very, very loud, and they're going to have to listen to us eventually. Just keep shouting.
On the discussion with Gino Kelly and Ming, Ming was saying that the last vote, there was nothing to say, look, this is a working model. This is what it looks like if we do it. So when the vote happened, it was kind of like, this is what we should do, but we had no kind of evidence. Now, if a vote comes around, like you said, you've got that student vote, people are more open to this. The fact that they can say, look at the success in the States, look at the success here and there, wherever. Yeah, so it's looking a little bit more likely and a bit more, like I said, we have a bit more facts, something to back it up now.
A bit more reasoned, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I know people and businessmen and women who would not have any idea about cannabis, would never interest them, would never have consumed it, would have no idea. And purely because I wreck everybody's head about it, they now know an awful lot. And they're like, there's one guy I know, he makes air conditioning units. He's like, I can make air conditioning units when it's legal. If it's going to grow that much, like if the business is that huge, I can make this. Like, somebody else was on about making certain types of pots and
there's
unbelievable.
There's a huge amount of home horticulture that happens in this country and I constantly ask the question, how can you buy all of the equipment in one shop and the ornaments in the other shop?
You mean seeds?
No. They're yes,
for
ornamental seeds.
Seeds are perfectly legal
for ornamental purposes only.
It's not illegal to buy seeds. It's not technically illegal to grow seeds. It's illegal to possess a cannabis plant.
Right.
Yes. So I think we should outlaw asparagus.
But chilies.
Yeah, it's nasty. I agree.
Chilies.
My point is,
chilies, the ghost
you can
chilies.
grow it.
Yeah, AJ is going to start an underground ghost chili black market.
You can grow a plant that is used in pepper spray,
purposely designed to hurt people.
Ghost chilies and purposefully. I mean, they're genetically modified to be as painful as possible when you spray it in someone's eyes, and yet something that will make you want to give someone a hug and eat ice cream. That's the illegal thing, and
Sure, you can get arsenic out of apple seeds and murder somebody.
Yeah,
fact.
And cyanide out of apricot seeds.
Well, listen, no one cross chair and nothing.
Don't cross us.
Listen, it sounds great. We're kind of obviously very pro, and I think we've labelled a few good decisions, a few good reasons why. We're also put the reason against, so the argument against, I want to park a little bit. Let's now move on to reform means what exactly. So if there's a vote, does reform does it follow a certain path? Are we talking about decriminalisation? You know, we've medicinal. Do we go decriminalisation, full legalisation?
That's the previous path.
Is there a blueprint to how?
We're stuck on medical at the moment. We can't even get that right.
But is there a blueprint that sort of would pan out, or is it?
It depends who you talk to, because everybody would have their own idea and opinion on what the perfect path forward is. Like, I think what needs to happen, yes, like legalization is one conversation that we're probably going to be having for a while anyway. Mm. But I think what needs to happen yesterday is decriminalization.
Like in Portugal.
Yeah, like just stop criminalizing people. Like, it's costing the state so much money.
Prosecute.
To bring people into court, for the judge to 90% of the time give them a fine, but they still have a criminal conviction. And there is people that go to prison for 3, 6 or 12 months for possession of cannabis.
Yeah, our first story that we decided to cover when we were doing this podcast was about whether or not the judiciary was softening towards average Joe user, because there was a guy in Tipperary or in Limerick that had 3 mature plants. The guards had called around during lockdown on an unrelated matter, and they got a whiff and found this guy. The guy got away with, or was sentenced to community service and a donation to the poor box, but wasn't given a criminal conviction.
Yeah,
and we were wondering, was that a top down
2 or 3 plants? They said
and a little bit in the
80
fridge.
euros worth in the fridge, and they said 2,500 euros worth of plants. You know, is there a sense of common sense creeping into the judiciary system in that respect? Or
I would hope so, but there is still a lot of needless criminalization. Like, I think a certain demographic of people, when they do use it for medicinal purposes and they explain it to the judge, if they have a sympathetic demeanor, if they're good at the emotive arguments, then I think the judge will be sympathetic towards them back.
Yeah.
And there has been an increasing number of cases where people have pleaded medical use and they have been spared a criminal conviction. But there's still people getting caught with 1 joint valued at a tenner and being dragged in front of the district court. You have a criminal conviction and a 400 quid fine.
Well, and obviously a very strong remit from the Gardaí to go looking for you. Every week there's several news items about another case and another case and I know some of these are talking kilos and kilos, and there's guns and cocaine and whatever else involved. And
I think there's a lot more involved.
I think
it's definitely criminal.
Yeah, so we're separating that from the average Joe who wants to maybe grow a plant or 2
for personal use, like say Spain, where three plants are legal.
3 plants are legal,
yeah, he's not out selling 50 bags in the street corner.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And talking of news, we now would like to segue really nicely into our news section.
Brand new
news section.
Just for my arrival this week, is it?
No, we did it last week. We did it last week.
We're just trying to get a bit of structure together, you know. Generally, it's just whatever.
That was just practice for me, lads.
Dinty and I were arguing over whether we should do the CBD Collins news story first or last, because it will probably take up the whole section. There were a couple of other stories I wanted to look into, like, in fact, Dinty, have you got them there?
I have. Yeah, do you want me to run through them?
Yeah, Dinty on the news desk.
Right, yeah. Look, there's a couple of stories here. One in particular, another guy, because we keep talking about these, just random guys that get caught growing the odd plant in his room. 1,700 quid fine. He'd no convictions ever. He's not even known by the cops. And so he did. I think he got away with it. Let me just see. He did. He had an addiction since he's 16. So this is the thing that got me was, and it seems to be the kind of response in everyone, or a kind of a statement in everyone about the defendant is, this particular guy, he's been smoking since he's 16, and I think he's been having troubles, at the moment, and he uses a coping mechanism, this, that, and the other, but he doesn't smoke it anymore.
He's quit
He
now.
doesn't smoke it anymore since he got caught. So they all seem to I'm sure that gets them, it helps their case and so on. But come on.
Well, you probably have to submit a test, or Natalie, you'd be able to tell us. Do you have to submit a test if you're like? What's the process of being caught and criminalized?
Do you know the process?
It depends. Like, some judges will order a probation report. That probation report might include a report from addiction services or addiction treatment. That will require a urine sample. Some won't. It completely depends on the person.
It said that the accused take part in a restorative justice program and adjourned the case to April 29 for a report.
Just reminds me of that scene in Train Spotting when Rent Boy's up in the dock and he says,
"You always bring up Train Spotting."
He loves that movie.
Yep.
He loves it.
I did it. I studied Train Spotting at university. With God's help, I'll conquer this terrible affliction. When he says that in the docks, and his cheeky smile on his face, he's convincing the judge that, oh no, he's going to give it up. He's going to give it up. Next item. What's the next one?
So more of the criminal ones as we deemed them earlier on. Something like over 200k worth of drugs found in mail centers or something like that, coming from the US, UK, Canada, Kenya, and Spain. And they were parcels declared as fishing bait, keychains, art supplies, green tea, and sports shoes. But yeah, look, it's let me see, 99 kgs of illegal drugs, herbal cannabis, and cocaine.
Now that's a lot of money going out of Europe, or out of Ireland.
But sorry, Adrian, but it goes back on this thing about this is another. It's the cops bragging again, where realistically it's doing more harm than any good. It creates the knock-on effect of this is a lot more harmful than it is good. This is nothing really. 200k's worth.
The guards put up a picture yesterday of, I'd say maybe 9 little pot plants with little sprouts that are no bigger than my baby finger. Like, little sprouts that are no bigger than my baby finger. Cannabis seized, valued at 90,000 euros. Huh? You won't even make a cup of tea out of what's in the picture, lad.
Well, no, to be fair, I'm looking at this and it seems to be a fair amount. But yeah, but in general, they look to blow it, don't they?
I think the guards are valuing cannabis at like 20 quid a gram. I think some of the plants they're valuing at like 800 quid, regardless of whether they're flowering or not. So valuation is way off as well.
Ali G steps in. Yeah, I know a mate of mine can get it a bit cheaper than that.
But it is that to give the judge something to throw at the person? Like, is the valuation part of the problem with the stigma? Again, is it?
Because I've heard of cases there where people are getting convicted of 2,000 euros worth of cannabis, and it's like, I bought that for 500 quid.
Yeah.
I bought it for 600 quid. Like, it's not 2,000 euros.
The same thing happened.
If I had the receipt,
when I
maybe we need to start getting receipts.
And the tax credits.
Tax credits, yeah.
When I came to Ireland, I drove an old banger of fucking car over. It cost me 800 quid, funnily enough. And yeah, the VRT office tried to tell me that it was worth £2,000. So I had to pay 30% on £2,000, not 30% on the actual amount I bought it for. So that's all part of the same system. So
I think it goes well for the Garda figures as well. Like if they're giving their end of year brief of how much drugs was seized in Cork City or Dublin City or a certain area, the higher figure they give, the better they look at their job.
So Dinty showed us this sort of meme. It's not even a meme, is it? It's a video by a guy from the UK, like an ex-drug law guy, I think.
Is that the Anyone's Child video? The ex-cop and the valuation.
Yes.
If you ever see a Garda seizure on Twitter or on Facebook, just pop that video
in. You want that to be known. Yeah,
it's brilliant.
Yeah, every week I keep saying I have to get his name. Keep forgetting the guy's name.
If anyone listening has any way of kind of creating a bot that will just automatically copy that up on every post.
There must be someone listening that's tech savvy that can do that.
I'm sure there is.
Just too stoned to do it.
Yeah.
I have to start now. I'm going to find someone who can do this for me.
A Twitter bot.
Yeah, that'll just keep posting that video under all the seizures of drugs.
And the last story.
Tell me it's about the Italian footballer.
Oh, the Italian.
Sorry, last but one. The Italian footballer, yeah.
Look, I'll throw it out there, Why not?
Go on, give us the Italian footballer.
Italian ex-football star, Sartor grew marijuana plants. But the thing is, right, it's not just that he grew them, there's meant to be shitloads of them. So Luigi Sartor, being house arrest, let me see, 106 plants.
106 plants, yeah.
In a cottage with no curtains. He grew it in a cottage with no curtains, and the neighbours.
Well, they need lights to go,
it was a down gaff or something, wasn't it? It's not even. You don't even live in it.
Like his granny's gaff or something like that, or like his old family home.
Yeah.
And he didn't even buy curtains. Like if you were going to buy all the equipment to grow marijuana, you'd buy curtains.
He obviously didn't care.
Where was this? Which country was this? Was it
Italy?
Oh, sorry,
North Italy, yeah.
Yeah, when I think of sports people and drugs, I think of Ian Botham, the English cricketer who used to enjoy drinking and cocaine, and of course Maradona. I mean, this guy,
I just think of Gaza.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a generation thing.
There's a great quote. There's a great Keith Richards quote.
Are you saying I'm old, Natalie?
No, I see. I just dig holes for myself without even meaning to.
There's a great Keith Richards quote about. He said that fair dues to Lance Armstrong for winning so many Tour de France's, because when he was on drugs, he couldn't even find his bike. That's normally when I think of sports people and drugs, it's either cocaine or doping. I don't know if that's just
depends.
Yeah, it depends. Yeah.
And listen, so the last news story is we're having a laugh here, but the last news story is actually quite upset. Like, it's a bit disturbing, isn't it, Natalie? I know that we had a couple of emails back and forth about the Little Collins CBD shop in Galway, is it?
Kilkenny.
Galway and Kilkenny, they have two shops.
Yeah.
But, like, they're not the only ones getting raided.
There was a store in Waterford as well.
Waterford, Westmeath, I think Tipperary, Clare. I don't know where or what. Like, since the last year, they are just increasingly targeting CBD shops.
So, sorry, Natalie, earlier on you said the reason why it's illegal is to do with the trace percentage that's of THC that's in it. So is that then just that it's a technicality? It's just a technicality.
Yeah. So it's just basically that our law hasn't been changed yet. Like, they have to change it eventually. They just haven't done it yet. And it stems from a ruling from the European courts in November called the Cannavape case. And that was focused on CBD vaping pens or vaping liquid, I think it was. And they were being imported into France, and they were selling them in France. And France had a law that said you can't have any CBD products unless it comes from the fiber and the seed, which you don't really get products from. Like, you need the flower, you need the fruit, you need the leaves off of it.
Yeah.
And they brought a case to the EU, and the EU answered the question. The question was, is CBD a narcotic? Is it a psychoactive substance? Is it illegal? Like, can France stop me selling my product in France? Because freedom of goods, single market and all that.
Yeah, free trade between borders and that.
Exactly. And the court in the Canavate case turned around and said that member states cannot prohibit the marketing of CBD lawfully produced in other member states when it's extracted from either the seed, the fibre, or the whole plant.
Okay, so that's
you can't stop it.
That was the ECJ, that was the European Court of Justice. When was that ruling?
That was November 2020.
Okay, so it's recent.
Yeah, very recent. And then in December, the UN descheduled cannabis from the 61 Convention as a narcotic. So that does it. It's more kind of symbolic than anything else, realistically.
Yeah. So and then we've these kind of store owners that are getting raided. Like you said, it's not just the little Collins ones. There's more, and if it's based on a technicality, why are they? Is it an easy target for them?
You see, I think what the problem is at the moment is the CBD flower. I don't think that they are going out to target oils or anything like that, because we've had CBD oils in Ireland for many years. Like, I remember using them 10 years ago for anxiety, for exams and
Body
stuff.
Shop had hemp moisturizer like in the 90s, I think, you know?
Yeah, like Penny's sell CBD eye masks and face masks and stuff like. So I don't think it's the oil that they're focusing on. I think what they are actually targeting is the CBD flower. Because our law, we can't have any THC in it, but especially the flower. Even for medicinal or scientific purposes, for CBD, the fibre and the seed is okay, but not the flower or the stem or the leaves.
And
I think that's what they're targeting in the
I go through, before lockdown, through Switzerland, sort of probably once a year sometimes, and I was amazed to smell CBD, because you can buy it in the shops over there now, CBD.
They were selling a CBD plant in Aldi in Switzerland for 10 quid the other day.
There you go. Yeah. So again, I struggle with the why. Like, why are they putting so much time and effort into such a small thing? And you know, it's ironic because you've got the UN, and the UN are drafted in often to resolve conflicts that there just doesn't seem to be a way to resolve. And at the same time, the UN have said that cannabis is not a dangerous drug. You know, it's almost a narcotic. It's almost as though they've already solved a problem that we're still arguing about.
For many years, countries would have used the fact that we can't make cannabis illegal, because if we do, we have to break an international convention that we've signed up for.
Which is okay, right?
The UN convention. And I think if countries made it illegal, they were breaking international law. So I think a lot of countries would have used that excuse for many years of why they won't even engage in the conversation around cannabis, is because it's a dead end. We can't do it because we'll have to break international law.
Our hands are tied at the top.
Exactly.
Have they prosecuted any of the store owners in Ireland yet? Have they brought a successful case against them?
I don't know. Like, I know Little Collins is up soon. I don't know about the others now, being honest. I know there's a couple in progress. I know there's a couple that are getting convicted for sale and supply of drugs. And if those drugs are valued at more than 13,000, there's a mandatory 10-year sentence handed down with those.
Now, when they're being, so this was a CBD shop that were selling CBD products, and they're up. Okay, so they're not classing it as CBD, they're classing it as drugs. So then will they be able to appeal to the ECJ and say, we need this overturned? But because the route that the Irish government is taking, they're calling it a narcotic.
Yes. Like, the problem is that when the guard sees the CBD or the CBD flower and they test it, there's only one test that they run. Is it cannabis or is it not? It doesn't say THC content. It doesn't say CBD content. It's just yes or no, cannabis or not.
And so, cannabis is anything with THC in it?
anything that comes from the cannabis sativa plant is cannabis, and it's illegal.
Is indica all right?
So what about indica? Yeah,
Indica's fine. Yeah,
I'm the real anti-G one, wasn't it?
No,
No,
cannabis sativa is the collective name for the whole
I
thing.
thought that we just had a loophole figured out. You know, the whole idea of getting somebody who's just done law into the gang was to get this stuff over the line.
You thought you get one over on me, not a whole.
Brilliant.
But that's what little Collins is doing at the moment, is because he is getting prosecuted for sale and supply of drugs. He is taking a judicial review, which will review his prosecution, or his criminal charges, and they will see whether it's lawful or not. So I don't know the ins and outs of the cases, but I presume they're relying on EU law. So I presume that they will send I don't know, will they have to send a question to the EU courts because it's already been answered in the cannabis case that CBD is legal.
But the damage that's been done through all this.
Judicial review has no legal aid. It is expensive. Thousands and thousands it's going to cost to take this judicial review. It's not open to a lot of the small little businesses around Ireland to do this.
This is a benchmark case. This is Collins v the DPP. Basically.
Can you remember the Bederev case where drugs were legal for 24 hours after it years ago? That's exactly what it's like. I was going to say that earlier
on. That's how inadequate we are, and that's why I was really pushing on the term technicality, because that's us just being fucking idiots. We legalized drugs for a day or something. Come on.
And everyone was terrified to do anything. It's like, I'll just stay in my home. I'm not going out there.
When the head shops were around.
It's like the purge outside or something.
when that's what's it called? Salvia stuff was around. I told you that story last week. I spoke to some salvia and was rendered
allegedly. You allegedly did that.
It was
you
bought
allegedly
in a shop.
It was legal then. It's fine. You can say it.
It rendered me vegetabilized for about 4 or 5 minutes. And you could buy that in a shop. But something that might just help someone's anxiety a little bit. They're being dragged through just hell, really. I mean,
just to get. I suppose one of the difficulties is, how do you prove, because the judiciary will say, they're just going to say that they need that for their anxiety. They're just going to say, like they were talking about the legalization for medical use in the States, where everybody go, hey, doctor, I got a sore back. I need some of the marijuana. And they just write the prescription for it. And it was this quasi, it's kind of legal, it's kind of not,
Well,
there's reports out of people who have changed from opiates to cannabis in the States, and they have cut their opiate consumption in half in 6 months.
There you go.
Yeah.
And no, not opiate addiction. I might go opiate to manage pain. And they've cut their what would you rather somebody be on? 30, 40 opiates a day or cannabis?
Well, synthetic cocaine or synthetic morphine.
Well, they would rather take. Rather they take the synthetics that's advertised on TV.
When he talks.
Well, that was going to be another question I put to you, Natalie, and putting you on the spot a little bit. Are there other pressures, whether financial or otherwise, that are being put on decision makers to keep it illegal? Is that a fair question?
Well, I don't know. There is two sides of the argument. There is people who will be adamant that it should be kept like social club type, that they don't want pharmaceutical companies, that they don't want corporate cannabis. But I think there is a place for both to coexist. There is situations where you're going to need pharmaceutical companies and corporate cannabis companies, because you're going to need to make capsules of THC, or you're going to need to process into a certain product for certain people. But I think when it does become legal eventually here, because I'm not going to shut up until it does, but when it does, I think cannabis users will make the right choice. Are you going to go to Lidl for your vegetables that are going to go off in 2 days, or are you going to go down to the farmer's market?
They're selling one of those plants.
And it is going to be that.
Yeah.
Throw your own at home is cheaper.
They'll be along the exit. Just you'd collect them with the smoke-free fuels because that's illegal.
Like, we're a capitalist society, so you're not going to get rid of pharmaceutical companies and corporate cannabis companies.
Of course not.
I do think there's a place for both of them to exist alongside each other. But on the other argument of is there interests behind it, just look at the recent figures. Like, pharmaceuticals are Ireland's biggest export in the last 10 years. There's been $7.2 billion of an Irish company buying GW Pharmaceuticals.
Yeah. Yes, we
Central
covered
Bank
that topic.
have €150 million raise. Like, if they think that we're all stupid and we don't know what's going on behind the background, they can think again, because we all know exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah.
They're going to legalise growing hemp and CBD, but they're only allowed to sell it to one or two suppliers. And I wonder who those one or two suppliers are going to be.
Well, here's the question: is if they had both industries, would we make even more money as a country? Like you were talking about the person who does the air conditioning. We anecdotally cover the story about the crisps, Kyo's crisps, and the plants?
Oh, Uncle Tony.
Uncle Tony. God bless Uncle Tony.
The amount of people that bought the crisps after that happened.
Yeah.
No, we didn't cover that. I think that was...
No, I think it was the first post on Highrish Times Instagram.
Was it?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So there's the question: is if I wanted to start a hemp farm next week, and AJ, you had said that the number of licenses have gone up for the amount of hemp farms that are now in the country.
Yeah, the acreage went down last year, but the licenses went up. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I was looking at Kyo's, and there was a story about a company in Thurles that make these flowers, and I just looked at the greenhouses and I went, if they turned into hemp or marijuana grow factories, the amount of money that would be generated. Like the fiscal side of it really interests me. Obviously, I'm passionate about having the mental health side looked at, but the fiscal policy that could be created, because if they put tax on it, that's 21%. They put duty. They're going to put duty, say, on the stuff that you use to make it. Then electricity has to be used. People have to pick it. Transport has to happen. Packaging has to happen. Export, if it's an export, like say the Netherlands have kind of cornered the market on that export medical.
A lot of thought into this.
So, yeah.
There was a tweet today, actually, Cork Can on Twitter, and she actually broke it down. So, if there's 17% of Ireland are cannabis smokers, now that is a very conservative estimate. It's probably up about 20-25%. It works out about 1 in 4, 1 in 5 on average. If there is 17% of cannabis users in Ireland, that's 930-something thousand people in Ireland. If half of those people bought €100 a month worth of cannabis products, that's 11.2 million euros a month in revenue.
Yeah,
it's taxed at 23%.
We did similar numbers. Jay, you crunched numbers already, hadn't you?
I crunched the numbers and came to the amount of revenue that it would bring in would be comparable to the latest year's LPT property tax, which was about 431 million. Now, it had started about half of that, and then they started getting arrears in. So about 400 million within the first year. If the numbers were that conservative, you would do essentially what the local property tax did. And that was an austerity measure brought in to recoup money into the coffers. So if you had that, another 300 million, and that was on a conservative estimate of, that was, but that math equates to, good.
That's just the good. That's just the product.
But that's just the product. And then you've got the growing. So say, for instance, growing, there's electrical use, and they reckon it costs 1 watt. It's 1 watt per gram on a plant. So if you want to get 800 grams off a plant, it has to be 1 watt. And that's a cycle of light. If it's 12, and then 18.6, allegedly, you would then have the energy usage. So it's 1 watt per gram per 3-month growing cycle at 18.6 or 12.12. And then there's the electricity, then there's the growing medium, there's the water rates bills, the grey water disposal, transport. So there's a huge number of knock-on businesses. It's like they
your
kind of
staff,
say,
your PAYE, your USC, your extra disposable income, your less
And
people on social welfare.
Infrastructure.
yeah. And we legitimize the low corporation tax on companies like Apple for the fact that they create ancillary jobs within a community and then within a country. So is it too far of a step to legitimize hemp growing and marijuana growing for the same reasons?
No, I think it's, especially like after the COVID pandemic, Ireland are going to be facing a recession.
Yeah.
Some sort of recession.
Every
money
country
is going to be tight.
Yeah.
And if you look at the figures of a cannabis industry in Ireland, realistically, it's not going to take that much to actually get the market up and running. Growing wise, we already have a lot of the agricultural processing facilities here already. Yeah. We already have the agricultural land. We already have the farmers that want to grow.
Temperate, humid climate as well.
And surprisingly enough, we do actually have a lot of knowledge in the industry in Ireland. For such a small island where it is still illegal, there's a lot of knowledge in here. It's not going to take that long to get this up off the ground and actually get the market going. And if you're talking about figures like that can come back into the revenue, into the public purse in the next 18 months, 2 years maybe at most, before you actually see the bulk of the revenue come back.
Yeah.
But look what that can do to rejuvenate our health system, to put money into mental health services, to put money into addiction services, to put money into homeless services.
Would it go towards our carbon footprint in terms of, the CO2 output if we were, say, moving away or moving into like high turnover stuff like that?
Like hemp can replace practically all the plastics that we use, all the single-use plastics that we use.
Yeah.
So if you harness it properly and you harness it correctly and you use there is an opportunity to be able to use every single aspect of the plant.
So
so it's environmental, it's sustainability, it's compostable, it's ticking all the boxes.
This is the Green Party platform. We need to get the Greens on board.
They've already sailed on that ship, I think.
When you've won the case and it's legal, Natalie, then what will you do?
I love that one. I won it. The only one in
when you have single-handedly overturned,
I will take that trophy.
Please don't forget.
Queen of Weed, you can call me.
Yeah, you should be the Bud Queen of Ireland.
Bud Queen.
They'll write mythology books about you. So apart from following you, Natalie, it's O'Regan. Is that am I pronouncing it right? O'Regan. Yeah. So it's Natalie O'Regan 1 on Twitter. So anyone listening, follow, support. You'll see lots of activity from you, and it's showing you a lot of the sort of the realm in which that you're quite active.
Cannabis and dogs usually. And the odd rant about the government.
And so apart from that, so what can we do to support? Like what if you have an audience, what would you hope to be able to sort of see an increase in the coming weeks and months?
Have a conversation with people about cannabis, like your mother, your grandmother, your friends. Open the conversation. It's not that scary. Try and educate them, gauge their opinion, gauge their response. I think Gino's upcoming bill this year on legalization is the perfect opportunity to open a conversation with somebody.
And how do we support that? How do we get if we've started the conversation, how do we get into
contact your TDs?
Follow Natalie on Twitter, contact TDs, yeah.
Contact TDs, write them emails. You're probably not going to get a response because they don't really like cannabis and they don't really want to talk about it. But if enough of us wreck their heads, and that is purely my political strategy, is I am going to wreck your head until you actually legalize cannabis. But just annoy your TDs, text them, email them, phone their offices, phone the Minister for Justice, put a post up on social media, try and get the word out there that there is a lot of public support around cannabis and that it's not as bad as your reefer madness hysteria has taught a whole generation of Ireland to be that it is. And it's not that bad. But there is going to be a lot of movement in the cannabis industry or the cannabis activism space in Ireland over the next couple of months. And just share posts, like them, retweet them, share them on Facebook or Instagram or wherever you see them. And the more the merrier, really. if you need a hand, give us a bell.
Awesome.
Great. All right.
Thank you so much, Natalie.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie.
Yeah, thank you very
No
much
bother.
for coming on.
That was a great laugh, lads. Thanks very much. One of the most chilled podcasts I've been on, I think.